You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
WCYTV
Here on the Daily Signal.
Good evening and welcome to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated first on 93 WIBC. The Democrats really have a pretty open line of attack against Donald Trump. All they have to do is say your tariff policy is causing a lot of chaos here in the short term. That's all they have to say. Now, would they then have to describe why the tariffs are bad and then, actually start articulating a plan? That would also be true. And, well, there's not exactly any economic plan Democrats have put forward other than spend lots of money in the last couple of decades. So instead of taking that as a pretty decently offered up opportunity to rebuild the party, instead they are just gonna dig their heels in and defend the stupidest things possible, like the 80-20 issues. And even their spokesmen, spokeswomen, spoke-thems, whatever, when they get up in front of outlets like MSNBC, have to admit, yeah, Trump really has us on our heels. Here's Alyssa Slotkin from Michigan.
Who would you say is the leader of the Democratic Party right now?
Look, people know me. I'm pretty straightforward. I don't think it's a secret that Democrats have been on their heels since Trump won the election, right? I don't think that's something hidden. And I think it's on us to be clear about not only leadership, and there's lots of leaders in both parties, but also a strategy, right? And I think that's something that as Trump has been successful in flooding the zone and just like every day, 15 things happening, we are still finding our footing.
Okay, so if you didn't catch the academic ease that was given in the answer there, she didn't go right out and say, we have no plan at the moment. Because the DNC does have a plan. Of course, we've read Ken Martin's memo, the new chairman of the DNC, in which he says our plan is to sing. So that they do have a strategy in place, but an economic plan, some kind of something that might actually be of benefit to Americans, well, the Democratic Party hasn't been interested in that in a long, long time. With some exceptions. The Democrats are actually going to bat for some individuals right now. Whom are they going to bat for? Well, they're going to bat for non-United States citizens who incited violent riots at different universities around the country, like UC Berkeley, like Northwestern, like Columbia University, where they set up encampments, where they defaced particular buildings on campus, and where they caused just a whole lot of trouble. Now, Trump's administration, especially Secretary of State Marco Rubio, has made the call, you know what? If you are not going to be useful, if you're not going to follow basic rules and etiquette, if you're not going to say, hey, we agree while we're here in this country to, treat it respectfully, you don't have unlimited rights to just act however you want as an immigrant or a green card holder, not a citizen, mind you, but as a green card holder, someone here on a student visa, etc., while you're here. And that has really ruffled the feathers of the left, because at Columbia University, there is a young man by the name of Mahmoud Khalil. Now, he's not a student at Columbia University. He has gone around for the last year or so, stirring up protests and violent actions by pro-Hamas protesters who have shouted rather interesting things about Christians and Jews, who have openly advocated for violence. Tony, how do you know they've openly advocated for violence? Because when I was in Chicago at the DNC, I spoke with these individuals while they were marching in the protest. I infiltrated. I walked up and accidentally ended up leading these pro-Hamas protests because there was no leadership. It was an embarrassment. And they were openly advocating for violence, for vandalism. And they committed harassment on the light end of things, and then just straight out assault, battery, destruction of property, theft, robbery, and so on. And so Columbia University, which really treated these protesters with a light hand, you're little anti-Semitic, Islamic terror-loving fools, but we love you because all of our staff are pro-Marxist eggheads as well. And so now the Trump administration has pulled $400 million worth of grants, and the individual Mahmoud Khalil, as well as I'm sure several to follow who are here not as U.S. citizens, who do not enjoy the same rights as you and I do because we're citizens. We enjoy the rights of citizens. You do not have the right to come here from another country and then advocate on behalf of foreign terror networks against people in this country. That is not a right that you have. And so, anywho, the Senate Judiciary Democrats, because every House committee needs its own little special Twitter account for some reason, and that goes for both sides of the aisle. But the Senate Judiciary Democrats, they got out their Twitter account and they said, "Free Mahmoud Khalil, free him." And they post a picture of him just looking all innocent. I love how the pictures, whenever there's a person arrested, is always them looking just like really chill and nice and friendly, instead of, the kind of stuff that they were screaming and yelling and inciting and the crimes they were committing while on American soil. But, I digress. I do appreciate the response of the White House, by the way, to this particular arrest pending deportation. The White House Twitter account responded, "This is the first arrest of many to come from President Trump." And I do enjoy that. I do enjoy that if the Democrats are just going to go whole hog in on 80-20 issues, the vast, vast, vast majority of Americans do not support Hamas or radical Islamic terror. But the Democrats are just coming right out and supporting it. Speaking of immigration, customs, and enforcement, the Washington Attorney General, the state of Washington Attorney General Nick Brown, has filed a lawsuit against the Adams County Sheriff's Office. Why? Because the county sheriff's office cooperated with federal immigration agents, which they are required to do. So outlined in the lawsuit, the state is suing a county because it cooperated with federal authorities to uphold federal law. The Attorney General's case says sheriff deputies have unlawfully held people in custody based solely on their immigration status. They have gone out of their way to enable federal immigration agents to interview or question people in custody. You mean people that are here illegally? As in they have violated the law? Now they are here illegally? And they're just letting the feds ask them questions? No. Oh, the horror, the shame, the sadness, the evil. Goodness gracious, after all, you have amazing representatives like Democrat Rep. Jasmine Crockett, who has told us that actually it's not even illegal to be an illegal immigrant at all. No crime committed whatsoever.
It is not a criminal violation to enter the country illegally. It's not a criminal. It's a crime. It's not a crime, which is why.
Guys, I'm going to let you in on a little secret here. There are, in fact, civil violations. Civil violations are not what she's referencing here. There's a civil violation if you overstay your visa and now you are in the country, or if you accidentally wander outside of like international arrivals and you're in U.S. territory and you haven't gone through customs for some reason, you like walk through walls. Yeah, that would be a civil violation. Evading federal law enforcement and evading the legal immigration process by not going through a port of entry is illegal. And you can see her get a little awkward here because she says entering illegally is not illegal. And by the miracle of God, the wires accidentally connect in her head for a split second, so she deflects.
They're so frustrated because they really want our local law enforcement to go out and round up people when they could be looking out for the murderers and the sexual abusers as well as the robbers. They want them to go and round people up on civil accusations.
So I don't know how to tell her this because I'm pretty sure that she's not literate. But not only does 8 U.S. Code 1325 explicitly state that, it's against the law to enter the country illegally, but it, just for a few kicks and giggles here, it should be noted that the individuals that Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement are targeting are those who have committed violent crimes. And if you, in a neighborhood, they're not like driving through the neighborhood in a white unmarked van picking up any person who's brown. They are going to areas where there have been reports of illegal activity, and they are rounding up anyone there that is with the group committing illegal activities or who are in the same area as the individual with a most wanted status. Then to ask questions. Hey, what are you doing hanging around this guy who's accused of, being a child molester? Seems like a decent question. We'll let the radio folks head over to commercial, and we'll stay on with the live stream over on YouTube, X, and the TV side. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast. All right. For those who are new to the show, we kick over some of the radio crew to the commercial side to fulfill the FCC obligations there. The left is, I know this won't surprise you at all, since they're batting 2 for 2, going all in on illegal immigrants and going all in on pro-Hamas green card holders. They're also rallying the cry against Elon Musk and DOGE, to the point that they are rallying for like just general vandalism and theft and harassment across left-leaning social media platforms. And it's resulting in an interesting series of incidents. 44 tires were stolen off of 11 different Teslas that were parked in League City, Texas. There was a Cybertruck set on fire in Seattle. Here's what that looked like.
Oh my gosh, a Tesla Cybertruck is on fire. All right. There's a fleet of Cybertrucks right now.
There have also been 2 different Tesla dealerships, perhaps more by the time that we're getting this particular data out to the public, that have been shot up. There are Tesla dealerships that are being vandalized because people on the far left are really outraged at Elon Musk. To the point, by the way, where individuals traveling in cities like New York City, for example, are being chased by, well, as you can see here, very not unhinged individuals with long beards and hair, punching windows and flipping them off, you know, that standard New Yorker behavior. The libs are really losing it. And one of the reasons that they're losing it is because Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency are finding additional waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government. For example, in 2020 and 21, the SBA granted 5,593 loans for $312 million to borrowers whose only listed owner was 11 years old or younger at the time of the loan. Now, here's the thing. It is legal, technically, to have a business arrangement in which you provide an 11-year-old a loan, but it's really unlikely for these over 5,500 loans because they also used a social security number with the incorrect name. Now, you can claim that that's accidental because governments suck at anything, but there's a lot of accidents going on. And at the very least, Americans are really annoyed at seeing hundreds of millions to billions of dollars that are being thrown out with all of these clerical errors attached. Whether it's social security payments who are going to individuals who don't exist, or individuals who should have stopped receiving social security payments, or whether we're looking at certain groups of individuals who have made the wild decision to use non-government organizations completely against their charter, like World Charity, for example, and are taking sizable amounts of U.S. money. Americans are not in favor of this, and the left has made their entire line, the entire thing they're focused on, clinging to the things that lost them the election in 2024, and we hate Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency. That's pretty much it. And that's not useful, by the way, when you're in a constitutional republic in which there are oppositional political parties. It is useful to have a party that pushes back a little bit in a way that matters on kitchen table issues for Americans. But Democrats have lost all kinds of, well, any kind of reasonable trust. They've lost any kind of connection with the working class Americans that they pretend to be so focused on. Trump's busy talking to those individuals. In fact, a lot of the left-leaning groups like the UAW are in support of Trump's auto tariffs. And we're only scratching the surface. And to really dig in a little deeper, we're going to have to talk about Justin Trudeau being out, Carney jumping in, and it's going to be great. So we're going to pick up the radio crew. It's the Tony Kinnett cast here on the Daily Signal. We'll be back in just a second.
It's the Tony Kinnett cast on 93 WYPC.
Well, Justin Trudeau, the illegitimate son of Fidel Castro, he's gone. I mean, he's still kind of around, but the Liberal Party has designated Mark Carney, a banking guy, we'll talk about him in just a couple of seconds, as the replacement for Trudeau. Because in Canada, you elect seats to Parliament, and the majority holder of seats in Parliament appoints the Prime Minister. So as much of a bastion of democracy as Canada claims to be, there is no direct election for the Prime Minister in Canada. Now, for the record, I think that state legislatures in the United States should go back to electing senators on the national level. That's what that was for, and we can talk about disastrous amendments to the Constitution another time. Mark Carney started out with some barn burner speeches after he was selected to replace the weepy Taylor Swift attendee Justin Trudeau, and it got the liberal crowd all hot and bothered and excited because I'm reminded of a clip from The Simpsons in which Sideshow Bob was arrested for trying to murder Bart and also for electoral fraud. And anywho, so Sideshow Bob says that deep on the inside, despite everyone's little liberal conscience, they all desire for the cold, hard rule of a Republican. And Carney here is not actually talking like a liberal on international policy. He's trying to really shove through like a conservative backbone in, and it's landing because on the inside, everyone does have nationalist pride in their country that has, intelligence. And Carney is digging into that. Here, check it out.
Canadians know that new threats demand new ideas and a new plan. They know that new challenges demand new leadership. Canadians want positive leadership that will end division and help us build together. And to respond, my government will put into action our plan to build a stronger economy, to create new trading relationships with reliable trading partners, and to secure our borders.
So he talked about that, and again, I will explain why this is particularly interesting in just a second. He really laid it out on the table in front of the Canadian Liberal Party by suggesting that it was all in against the United States, which is a bold strategy, Cotton.
The Canadian government has rightly retaliated and is rightly retaliating with our own tariffs that will have maximum impact in the United States and minimum impact here in Canada. And my government will keep our tariffs on until the Americans show us respect.
Now, again, that sounds rather reasonable from the Canadian perspective. They're going to do this until Americans show us respect. And it is worth saying, by the way, that by not articulating what it is that the United States wants out of Canada in this particular trade war, that it's a little bit more difficult here to identify where individuals from the Trump administration and from Trudeau's lackluster remaining government getting ready for Carney's government, who's right and who's wrong and on what particular situation. So that brings us over to who Carney is. Carney is probably one of the most anti-United States liberals in the Canadian government. So Carney he's poised himself as this man to have a really, stiff backbone against Trump. But instead, if you actually take a look at his history, he's a guy who I believe was on the board over at he served as the governor of the Bank of Canada from 2008 to 13. He served as governor of the Bank of England from 2013 to 2020. He's never served in an elected office before. This is a man who has countless times advocated that the world leave the US dollar as the global currency standard. This is a man whose economic interests are diametrically opposed to the United States. He's a radical fan of corporate control via climate policy. And while he comes across as a bit of a white-collar, upstanding, strong-speaking individual, he has suggested that those who are lagging behind, he's talking about companies failing to meet UN fossil fuel consumption and carbon tax regulations, he said companies and those who invest in them and lend to them who are part of the solution, his climate New Deals type nonsense, will be rewarded. Those who are lagging behind and are still part of the problem will be punished. And this is a man who has no problem wielding government authority to crack down on anyone necessary. And the Canadians are putting him forward because he's anti-American. Now, that is a problem that brings it over to the Trump administration. Now, we could talk about Pierre Poilievre and how being seen as a friend of Trump, even though Pierre Poilievre has been a pretty staunch conservative and Canadian nationalist against the United States tariff policy, it has really sunk Pierre in the polls for being seen as a guy that's kind of synonymous with a Trump-like figure in Canadian politics. And bringing Carney in is a serious problem for Canada. Now, this brings us over to Trump, who is still bringing a lot forward on tariff policy. He suggested that tariffs might go up. He suggested, again, that maybe tariffs in some places might be reciprocal. In other places, they might be long-term, long-standing. He was asked this question over the weekend on a Fox News Sunday interview. And I'll let the president speak for himself.
And I want to ask you about Ukraine and the blow up the other day with Zelensky. Let me stay on the economy for a moment, because there are rising worries about a slowdown. You've got the Atlanta Federal Reserve saying we're going to have a contraction in the first quarter. Look, I know that you inherited a mess, and you said that the other night.
I've only been here,
but are you expecting a recession this year?
I hate to predict things like that. There is a period of transition, because what we're doing is very big. We're bringing wealth back to America. That's a big thing. And there are always periods of, it takes a little time. It takes a little time. But I think it should be great for us. I mean, I think it should be great. It's going to be great ultimately for the farmer. You know, don't forget,
So it's a rather curious case with Trump and his cabinet regarding tariffs. He's got different secretaries that are saying different things. Now, what Trump has said regarding, a little bit of a transitory period between administrations is understandable. However, it is also true that what Donald Trump's aims for regarding the United States economy right now are for tariffs to supplement the United States taxation system. The problem is that Republicans have a ridiculously slim majority in the House, and that the way that Trump's wielding tariff policy at the moment has left the market in a lot of instability. And that is a problem for Trump, because there are a lot of Americans who want to see the Trump economy succeed, and they want to see the Republican Congress, and not just through continuing resolution, but through budgetary measures. They want to see the Trump administration really get the golden age of America kicking through strong business enterprise. But the way that the tariffs are currently being communicated have a lot of people with a lot of question marks. So Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, she made the case over the weekend that the entire tariff situation with Canada was all about fentanyl, which I don't think that's true, but here's her making her case.
The conversations that I've had this week with Canadian officials, they were hoping to avoid the tariffs and had a lot of conversations, but not a lot of action. So this is the hope, is that the fact that President Trump has said something and now has enforced consequences, we really are hoping for even better partnerships. We need access to their criminal background system so that we know when someone crosses that northern border, who they are, why they're in our country, and who they may be partnering with. We also need them to work with us on identifying packages, technology investments.
So she goes into a national security angle. I have a couple of issues with this particular analysis, though I really like Kristi Noem. I think she's a good DHS secretary. We'll catch that up with the live stream folks. Radio folks, we'll see you after the commercial. It's the Tony Kinnett cast. Okay. I'm going to try to be very, just like, forthcoming with you guys, and the uncertainty just kind of laid bare before. I'm not asking you guys to think that I'm some kind of an expert analyst on this particular situation. It is a very fast moving problem. It is true that the United States does have a 6% to an 8% trade deficit with Canada, which is bad. We should not have trade deficits with allies. Just a trade deficit in general does not mean something is necessarily bad, but in this case, I believe that as far as Mexico and the United States are concerned, that the trade deficit should be close to zero as possible. That is something that Donald Trump has articulated many times throughout his campaigns and in his first administration. Number two, the United States does already pay conditional quota-based tariffs on several goods in Canada. And there is a measure of Donald Trump wanting to be the economically dominant force in the region so that he likely wants to dictate Canadian border policy and perhaps some national security policy, maybe throw a wild card in there for a third option. Something like Trump wants Canada's support in taking Greenland. Something like that. There's something at play here that is far more than just fentanyl. Because it's true, 43 pounds of fentanyl, which has been smuggled over the Canadian border, that can kill a ton of people. Absolutely. It is a very small percentage compared to what is brought over the border annually from Mexico. Now, maybe Trump is negotiating that the Canadian government is really tougher with China. Canada's way too friendly with China. That's a national security threat to the United States. All I am saying is right now, the markets have a good reason to be as unstable as they are. The Dow, the S&P, the NASDAQ have been down today because people are uncertain. And that's not good for the economy. Uncertainty is not a good thing. This idea, by the way, that the United States is going to move to a totally tariff-based economy and that the income tax and the property taxes and sales taxes, various things are going to be removed, I very much doubt it. Not because I don't think that Donald Trump could bring that through effectively. Not because I wouldn't want that to succeed. I think that an overall tariff system instead of an internal, convoluted tax system might be better for the economy. There's a lot to be said for the late 1800, early 1900 style economic policy in the United States. But is it likely and is it feasible? No, it's not. This is a convoluted mess that I think what is being suggested through tariffs is a bit of a short method approach to fixing. Now, on straight up foreign policy levers, yeah, absolutely effective. 100% effective, as we've seen with Colombia, with Panama, with Mexico. But do I see with Canada enough to say whether this is a success or a failure yet? No, I don't see either way. What I can say is that if this is not corrected soon enough, then Trump will likely abandon this particular policy and pursue something different. Because Donald Trump is a pragmatist, wants a good economy during his presidency. So either way, the market, I think, is going to correct in a rather decent fashion. But is there going to be some pain along the way? Yeah. Is it going to be the kind of pain that we look back on and say, yeah, that was worth it? Maybe not. That's the hot take. Is there even a solid confirmed take at the end? I'm not sure, but I'm not going to fluff you up and tell you things that I don't have knowledge of and pretend that I do. We'll be back in just a second to talk a little bit about the international news, because it's not just Canada, thank God. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal.
You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIPC.
Let's talk international news. There are some updates on the Russo-Ukrainian war and peace talks, negotiations that are moving much closer. Right off the top of the bat, when Zelensky came to the White House, not last Friday, but the Friday before, and picked a fight with Vice President J.D. Vance, and J.D. Vance then returned the favor and started this diplomatic negotiation process in front of the press, which, as much as people enjoy transparency, I don't think that one-on-one world leader talk should be in front of the press. There is an art to making some veiled threats when there's not the media to call the individual a very bad, stinky person, no matter who they are. But Zelensky ran off and then ran to Europe and held up the Oliver Twist cup and said, we're going to fight forever. And then Trump started to pull some plugs and pull aid. And the world said two things. Number one, that Trump was carrying out Putin's great Russian plan. And on the second, that Donald Trump was driving away Zelensky and driving away a peace situation in the Russo-Ukrainian war. Both of those things were garbage. They were false. They were objectively false. And we found that proved in a couple of different ways. Way number one would be that Zelensky did end up apologizing to the president of the United States and is now in Saudi Arabia, along with Secretary of State Marco Rubio, to begin a series of end-of-war negotiations, perhaps a ceasefire talk, a peace talk, those kind of things. We'll get to Marco Rubio and the outrage and the pearl clutching over on the international side in just a second. On the other side, the idea that Trump was just going to bow down to Putin, Russia's economy is based on two things. It is based on exporting weapons, and it is based on exporting oil. Those are the two things the Russian economy is based on. It does not have a robust industrial economy like the United States. It does not have a robust tech economy like the United States, or a robust service economy like the United States. It doesn't. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Boris Yeltsin approach to the Soviet economy, and then Boris Yeltsin's follow after, Vladimir Putin, the KGB agent from East Dresden, has governed Russia really much the same way since he took office. And again, if you're reaching back to when Putin took office, Putin was one of the first international leaders to reach out to the United States and express condolences after 9/11. Putin's been in office a while. So, what does this mean? It means that the Russian economy is fragile. Now, did I say completely ignorable? No. Did I say completely isolated? No. There's the silly idea that the sanctions that are in place around the world, Russia's so isolated, they can't even do anything right now. That's not true. Not true at all. Europe is currently buying lots and lots and lots of energy from the Russians. Because, places like Germany went and started shutting everything down to, satisfy Greta Thunberg and her dreams. So, Donald Trump came forward with a threat to Putin, said, you got to come to the table too, or the United States will undercut your economy completely. Donald Trump has considerable sway in the Middle East. That's the other major oil producer around the world. If Donald Trump and the United States, drill baby drill, starts exporting massive amounts of oil and gasoline and natural gas and other petroleum-based products from the United States, and the Middle East lowers their price as well with, everyone except Iran, which would be in the Saudis' interests, we'll talk about that in a couple of moments, then the Russian economy would not belly up, but go through a severe recession instantly, because the Russian economy is based on, again, the export of weapons, which, other than, selling a couple of AK-47s to Somalia, I'm just not as many opportunities as there used to be. And then the oil economy is really all they got left. And so Donald Trump threatened massive sanctions, tariffs, and to undercut the economy. That's a serious threat against Vladimir Putin. That brings us over to the current peace talks in Saudi Arabia. Marco Rubio said something today that upset a heck of a lot of people. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who I'm going to make the case right now, is the best pick for Vance to be vice president in the next election. Marco Rubio has not only consistently not disappointed me throughout the very early parts of this particular administration, he is clearing hurdles and leaps every time he goes somewhere he gets results. He flew down to Panama and sat that little El Presidente down and said, look, you drop China or we drop kick you. And presto, the contract with China and their Belt and Road Initiative was not renewed. Marco Rubio does not mess around. Of the relationships that Trump patched up between the first presidential run and today, few am I so thankful that he has amended relations with Marco Rubio. And here's why. Rubio made the case. He said, heading to talks with Ukrainian officials in Saudi Arabia, Ukraine must cede territory in any peace deal. And this threw the neocons and those over in Europe to a tizzy. I say, how could you say that, Ukraine's going to have to give up territory? Well, who's going to make them give it back? You? There is a realism when it comes to foreign policy. There is. And pretending that we're walking through this negotiation process and suggesting that Russia is getting something brand new out of ceded territory to ceded territory to Russia is foolish. It's beyond foolish. It's not going to happen. Russia has taken the Donbass and the Crimea, And the Donbass especially is exceptionally pro-Russian. No one's going to walk that back to Ukrainian territory. Now, could Ukraine, with some of the territory that it's taken in southwestern Russia, cede some of that territory back in exchange for chunks of the Donbass and the Crimea? Absolutely. But there's this idea that a lot of the international pundits and world leaders are fancifying right now, suggesting that there's this perfect rosy end where the world comes together and Russia's kicked out of Ukraine and shucksy doodle dandy, it's all fantastic, and Russia's booted on back to the Kremlin and Ukraine is stable and solid. That is not the case. It's not. It's not. And admitting what everyone already knows is not ceding ground to Putin. It's not. There are things that are ceding ground to Putin, by the way. Right now, Vladimir Putin, recognizing that the war is about to draw to a close, is going all in on an assault in different Ukrainian areas. There are new fronts that are being started. And this is going to be a bit of a thorn in the saddle of the Trump administration. Because right now, the public does not know what Trump has asked of Putin. Now, there are many in the public who have suggested that this means Trump hasn't asked anything of Putin. No, you don't know that. You don't. Trump has indicated multiple times that he's spoken with Putin on the phone, that he's communicated many different things regarding Putin. If you think that Trump hasn't stated a few details, a few things that he's expecting in concessions from the Russians, you're crazy. But at the same time, some of those moves may need to become more outward. It depends on really how the next couple of days go. Rubio and the Ukrainian delegation in Saudi Arabia is where this war is going to end, and the actors are starting to assemble in the region. Because Russia's going to have to figure out different economic means past the end of this Russo-Ukrainian war. At the same time, Ukraine is going to have to secure as many economic guarantees, which bring with them implicit security guarantees, to keep Russia out of the region in the future. So, in a particular individual named Mario Pawlowski said, so let me get this straight. He's talking about Rubio. He said, Russia invades, slaughters civilians, kidnaps children, and Rubio's solution is rewarding Putin with stolen land. Maybe he should hand over Florida first and show us how difficult concessions work. Expletives. Who has ownership of the Ukrainian territory? Who needs the help? This is not an end of World War II situation. It's not a pre-World War II situation either. It is a middle of World War I style stalemate situation. It's an armistice, but in a much darker form situation. The United States cannot get back the Crimea and Donbass. It's not happening. I would love for them to get it back. Sure, absolutely, it ain't happening. And by the way, in the same structure, while we're talking about international policy, it is worth noting that in the Middle East, the idea that there are friendly actors that the United States needs to come to terms with, and that we can trust and be friendly with all the live long day, and everything is wonderful and all of it is fine, and really, we really should, kind of take it easy on the world stage. You can't have it both ways. The United States, through the Trump administration, acts as a broker. Trump wants to broker peace between Russia and Ukraine. Trump wants to broker peace between Israel and the rest of the Abrahamic Accords nations in the Middle East. Neither of those things includes the extremes on more of the more establishment Republican side, called neocons, nor the populist isolationist approach. And as soon as people realize that pragmatic foreign policy is where we're at, the better it's going to be for the negotiation process as a whole, because the media is having a considerable impact on how these negotiations proceed. Exhibit A, Your Honor, would be last Friday. We're going to talk a little bit more about the left clinging to LGBTQ stuff, and I just got word that the Twitter stream is offline, the X stream, because of additional cyber attacks. It's kind of going in and out, so we'll give you updates on that with Sarah Westfall in a bit. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast. All right. Let's talk for just a quick second while the live stream crew is over on the commercial break about what we know at the moment about the X live stream kind of attack. Elon Musk has made the claim today that these attacks have originated from Ukrainian IP addresses. It's very easy to spoof where your IP is coming from. That's a very, very simple thing, in fact, for those who mess around with netcode and mess around with DDoS attacks and things of that nature. Number two, there are groups online that are claiming responsibility after telegraphing these attacks. Pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas protesters. It is unclear as of yet who the culprit was in these particular cyber attacks. Now, we're going to be talking with Sarah Westfall in a minute. She has a really good idea as to where a lot of this instability is coming from. You know what? I'm looking over at some of the comments. I think we will do a bit of bonus tonus tonight when we talk to Sarah Westfall and really dig into why some of these issues are progressing. Second, on the international front, at least as far as China is concerned, China, Iran, and Russia are holding joint military exercises. And I've seen a lot of really deep fears and concerns that the United States is kind of temporarily halting military exercises in Europe, as well as that China and Russia and Iran are holding joint military exercises. And I got a bit of a secret for you. They're both the exact same kind of performative. What is getting ready to happen is Zelensky and, the Russian minister Medvedev, or whatever his name is, and then Rubio are going to sit down at the table and they're going to start hashing out the end of this war. The United States, by not holding additional military exercises in Europe for the moment, is showing Putin, hey, we're not acting as an aggressor in this negotiation. We're acting as the broker, as the negotiator. We're outside of this. We're trying to help you facilitate the end of this war. Whereas Russia, by holding military exercises in these last-minute fronts and feints, is trying very hard to come to the table and say, well, look, we're making advances across European territory. Behold, comrade, look at the European territory. It's all the Russians. And both of them are really transparently performative. The United States is not pulling out of Europe. That just isn't a thing. Mainly because of economic interests in the long term. Though the EU really wants to claim that, the United States is going to have no kind of economic lordship over it. It does. The United States is the hegemonic power on earth, and it should be. And so as far as the United States is concerned, how we do things matters, but brokering peace on behalf of Europe as an ally of Europe in this particular instance won't bring Russia to the table. On the same side, Russia's trying to show the United States that it's a lot tougher than it is. The Russian and Chinese militaries are so woefully behind. I won't get ahead of myself. That is a conversation with Sarah Westfall that we'll be having in just a second. We're going to go pick up the radio crew from commercial. Then we're going to talk about LGBTQ plus nonsense because God forbid the Democrats be normal. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal.
This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast. It's good to be with you. Let's talk just a little bit about the cultural shifting over in the left. And do I mean that the left is kind of moderating? No. The shift has become all performative all the time. However, the flavors of performance are a little bit different, which is kind of fun. Gavin Newsom, who I will take the credit as being the investigative columnist who got him to veto the classifying not affirming your child's gender change as a child abuse bill. This man, in a new podcast he has where he's trying to sound all moderate and fun and friendly, and again, this performative idea, well, we gotta look more reasonable to the American people because he's going to try to run for the presidency in 28. Charlie Kirk from Turning Point USA had a conversation with him in which Gavin Newsom suggested that guys should not be competing in girls' sports. And the left freaked out and treated this as some kind of a huge, unbelievable concession. And, I mean, everyone knows, or at least everyone with a brain should know, that it was performative, but it was smart of Newsom politically to say this. Check it out.
So like, you right now should come out and be like, you know what? The young man who's about to win the state championship in the long jump in female sports, that shouldn't happen. You as the governor should step out and say no.
No, and I appreciate,
but like, would you do something like that? Would you say no men in female sports?
Well, I think it's an issue of fairness. I completely agree with you on that. So that's easy to call out, the unfairness of that.
So this, of course, brought the entire left down on him, and that led to Alyssa Slotkin, like kind of the de facto leader of the Democrat Senate right now, because Mazie Hirono's yelling like Yoko Ono. And then you've got Chuck Schumer, who's busy telling people how aroused he is. So Elisa Slotkin, who they picked to be the response to Trump's State of the Union style address, tried to answer the question that's like every American who has intelligence of any sort, not just Republicans, not just Democrats, independent, 80-20 issue. So Slotkin decides to like avoid it and answer it at the same time. Doesn't go well.
Senator, do you agree with Governor Newsom?
Well, look, I think, you'll have to talk to Mr. Newsom and his podcast, and we're all talking about it now because it's, good controversy. For me, I mean, I grew up playing 3 seasons of sports. In Michigan, sports is like our religion, right? I wouldn't be here, I think, without the leadership training that I got in women's sports. But for me, it's like, let the local community figure this out, right? In Michigan, we have a process in place where if someone who's born a boy wants to play in women's sports, you have to get a waiver. We've had it happen 2 times in our entire state.
So that's what she's going to try to suggest. It happens, none at all. And she says, well, this is just Republicans trying to start fires and, whatever. And they're going to try to claim it's a non-issue. But it is an issue. And the instances we have seen in which biological boys play in women's sports, almost without exception, are either blowing out records because boys are biologically different than girls are, as well as the horrible physical injuries, not to mention, shout out to Loudoun County, Virginia, the sexual assault of girls in locker rooms. Americans don't like that. So Democrats going, I don't see it, so it's not happening, ain't working. But that doesn't stop ladies like The View from just, saying the quiet part out loud and what they think.
Yeah, her friend went from female to male and is competing with other males.
So Gavin doesn't have a problem with that.
Well, I think part of the problem that the trans community is facing, and it's the same problem that women face, is if you don't know anything about our bodies, you don't know how it works. So
the gall of Whoopi Goldberg to say, if you don't know anything about their bodies, we do know how the bodies of guys work. That's how we know they're not women.
So when you come in and you say, oh, these are men, competing against women, you're assuming that the women are weak and just can't do anything except be here. Have you seen female athletes? They know what they're doing. So I'm not sure what's going on or why this is an issue. The same for me as when people say, oh, I don't know how I feel about you. You do. God doesn't make mistakes.
No. Whoopi Goldberg, ladies and gentlemen, I do find it morally abhorrent to brush aside the sexual assaults that we've witnessed because, why didn't the female athlete just, beat the rapist off? You mean, come on. Not really a good strategy at all, claiming that, these dudes, they're not all that, and, they're just as just soft and wonderful as the female athletes are. You can't have it both ways, and yet here we are. So, last but not least, this particular evening on this segment, we'll be getting over to our conversation with Westall in just a moment. A federal investigation has officially found the Maine Department of Education in violation of Title IX. So the official notice of the Maine Department of Education's failure to comply with Title IX was sent to state officials in a February 25th letter from Anthony Archival. Acting Director for Health and Human Services, Office of Civil Rights. About $700,000 has been received by the Maine Department of Education in 2024 from federal sources. This could now be in jeopardy because it's not in compliance. If you don't follow the federal rules on civil rights procedures, you don't get federal money. Now, of course, this brings us back to when Janet Mills, the wine mom of Maine, got in a bit of a tizzy with Trump, said, we'll see you in court. We'll see you there. Okay, totally fine to try that one out. But no matter how many district court judges rule in favor of these little temporary injunctions, at the end of the day, the executive branch of government has been given an enormous amount of authority through federal agencies. And whether you like it or hate it, in order for that to change, Congress will have to pull back power and size and scope and cost from the federal agencies. Until then, the president is within his constitutional authority to do a whole lot. Federal judges can't really say boo about it. All right, we'll kick over to Bonus Tonus on the live stream. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal. This conversation with Sarah Westall is really, really fantastic. You're going to love it. All right, we'll sling it over there. Tony Kinnett Cast.
This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated first on 93 WIBC. It's a joy to be joined by one of the veterans, one of the powerhouses in both the investigative journalism space and the podcasting space. And if you're not listening to Sarah Westall, you're missing out. So we'll make sure that link is in the description right off the back. See, we don't even do the wait till the end to plug thing, like right up front, because we got to get to the good stuff. Sarah, how's it going?
Great. Thanks for having me.
So there was a massive cyber attack on X today. There's a group that calls themselves like Dark Storm or Storm Darkness, or it's the most fake, edgy hacker group name I've heard in a long time. And they're mad at X. And that's just some of the drama going on right now. I mean, Meta and Google are back to their old censorship ways. What's going on out there?
Well, this is what I think. I think it's the factions, the dueling factions amongst the power elite. That's what I think is happening.
Really?
And the other thing that's happening that people don't talk about is the entire structure of the world has changed. We no longer, where it's not big oil and medicine and all these things that are running the world, it's big tech. And if you look at the largest market cap companies in the world, it's all big tech. Now, Saudi Aramco was third 2 years ago, and now they're sixth. And that was in December. I don't think it might have dropped again. So the point is that I believe that we're managing this world from like 20 years ago, 20, 30 years ago. And the people haven't caught up to what's really going on. And, the ship has sailed, so people have to look at the world differently.
I think that you are seeing something very much akin to the end of the 1800s, the early 1900s, when the industrial boom was happening in the United States. And so all of these regional steel and oil companies were at each other's throats. And you had I just popped into my mind. Now you're talking about all these new tech companies shifting from second to sixth and sixth to 15th and 16th back up to 2. Now NVIDIA is surging ahead with its AI models. And that's a totally different kind of the tech sector than social media tech. How do we even, as observers, right, as just people latching on to the media itself, how do we have a little bit of discernment here without either being overwhelmed or schizophrenic?
Well, in my background, I'm a systems engineer by training, and I started in the internet, so that's always been my perspective, right? And I've just watched it completely take over. And I did a 10-part series on 5th generation warfare and mind control. And I know it sounds all conspiratorial, but I tried to make the biggest umbrella possible with the best people I could find, researchers, coming from academic institutions, showing it from all different perspectives. And I don't think people quite realize just how powerful not only social media, but also technology has been intertwined into our government for decades now. Snowden and Bill Binney and Kirk Wiebe, all those whistleblowers coming out of the NSA, they blew the whistle a couple decades ago now. This is already entrenched into how the world works. When I had Bill Binney on my show years ago, he said, because we'd point to China. China's a technocracy. He goes, Sarah, we are so far ahead of China. I mean, we're giving China their technology. And so, and so when people are complaining about Elon Musk coming in, he has access to our data. It's like, well, that's pretty disingenuous, because where were you years ago when this really was serious, when they already built the entire infrastructure? So what he has access to help cut the federal bureaucracy and to actually go after crime and bloating and criminal activity, now that's a good use of technology, right? And so we have to be very specific as to what it is that people are doing and fight it from a smart standpoint, because there's so many people that are just fighting everything now, big tech, technocracy, right? And they can't differentiate between, they just think the whole thing is bad. You're not going to win when these companies are the biggest companies the world has ever seen. I mean, that ship has sailed.
Well, they're also providing products and services that do indeed have a net good on any industry that you point it at, other than, camping. Any industry out there that functions in our society today. It's like claiming that Bill Gates was malicious in the development of Microsoft Office, but Microsoft Office revolutionized how corporations operate from top to bottom. So when I look at how we fight this, the biggest thorn in my side, i.e. what popped into my head when you talked about not knowing how to fight it, is Congress. I mean, we all remember every couple of years we're brought to the table to suffer in some sort of a committee hearing where some aged congressperson asks the tech executive to describe how the internet works. And that's outside of changing the terminology right in front of the congressman to, evade questions. This is basic technology literacy.
That's right. That's what I'm saying. They're running it from 20, 30 years ago. And we have people that simply, it's like going in and running the oil company, and they've never, Burisma, Hunter Biden going in and sitting on the board and having zero experience in the oil world. You just don't do that if you're serious, right? We have a lot of people that have no experience, none whatsoever. They have no business making legislation and helping humanity go forward if they don't even have the basic understanding. I mean, they're going to be walked on. They're going to be completely obliterated, and they are.
So a lot of people don't want to be blocked on, they don't want to be walked on, they don't want to be obliterated, but they do want to take part in both using the technology that's in front of us. Well, it's a very frustrating thing to see DeepSeek. When that came out, I had my suspicions, because I've seen communist countries release fanatical designs before and things and claim they were able to do things. But I also wasn't really able to get my hands on it because we have certain policies that we very much distrust, Chinese services and applications like that. So how do those who still want to get their hands on and mess with some of this technological innovation, how do they do so in a way that's, I don't know,
well, that's
not
a great question.
Blindly walking into the lion's den?
Well, that's a great question. I've been saying that we need a lot more people that understand. We need the engineers who are trained in it to start stepping up. They've been so trained to stay in the background. They got to get out of the background. They're the ones that know it. And I also think that just because they understand it, just because you haven't gone to school for it, doesn't mean you can't learn it either. Right.
Yeah. Just like I can read a sociology report, I should be able to, and this was my opinion as a former science teacher, I always used to say there was nothing that I couldn't break down and make simple for my students to consume. Sorry to interrupt. Please continue.
No, that's perfect. That's exactly my point. And, you being a science background, that really helps at understanding kind of the broad spectrum of STEM, right? And, the engineers are creating all these problems. They need to come in and help create the solutions. And even if you aren't an engineer, you can get to that knowledge point. But we can't have Congress people up there not even understanding the basics. It's like they don't even know. I mean, pick an industry and see somebody who's just absolutely inept at that industry. Do you want them to help you forge the... literally everything is run on this stuff now. Amazon, people think of Amazon as a real retail company. They're bigger at AWS. people don't even know what AWS is. AWS is the software that runs. I mean, they're not the only player in the market. There's a big Russian player too. And then there's other players, they're all duking it out to get dominance. Right. But they run companies. They run their data. They run their software. They're the operations of the world, essentially, not just Amazon, but that industry. And nobody even knows what it is.
To clarify for the audience, AWS, Amazon Web Services, it's an entire sector of the tech economy of the medium that involves hosting data, displaying data, coordinating that data so that it pops up when you search for something, data, cloud storage, then of course being able to go in, and just because you throw something into the cloud doesn't mean you're going to be able to go find it. Have you ever thrown papers into a filing cabinet and then cursed yourself later for not organizing the filing cabinet?
That's right.
That's an entire aspect of data collection and then retention. That's one of the things that AI does, is it's able to sort through a massive amount of data very quickly. Yeah. So when we look at all of this junk, and it's a lot of junk to sort through because it's not organized, it's not clean. Walking into a house of a relative, that was a hoarder kind of a situation. I want to make sure that Congress and that the president has people around them that are able to explain the idiosyncrasies of this field. Elon Musk walking around saying, I'm the president's tech support. I mean, I don't care if he does nothing else at all. Being able to explain what the tech terms are in English, dang it, as the general would say in a Hollywood movie, that's extremely useful in today's day and age.
Well, and I think they're trolling people too much, right? They got to get a little bit more serious, stop acting like frat boys, right? I mean,
sure.
I'm just going to throw that out there.
Government is a serious business, and people want people to be serious when it comes to national security and their tax dollars.
That's right. And I think some of that trolling behavior they're doing is actually at the other faction of the cabal. I think there's factions going on. We just happen to see it. I don't think it's geared at us. That's kind of my theory. I mean, I guess I can't prove it, but I think they're trolling each other.
I think that it's fair, and I believe that that's very likely, especially when you take a look at what you said was the tell. I don't believe we're the target. There are still things that can surprise and change and alter the entire media landscape based on the actions of individuals. If there was a scaled approach that was fully focused on the average individual using the technology, there would not be the level of surprises that there are. We saw this during the COVID era, right? There weren't any really big surprises. Everything was more metered down, and maybe certain exposés were expected because that's where the focus was on people sharing information. Well, now I do feel it's though the left-wing media enterprise and the left-wing tech enterprise versus those in the center, the right, and other places on the compass.
Well, it gets scarier once you realize how powerful the control structure is. Robert Epstein, he's a PhD from Harvard, and he's been doing a ton of great work. If you haven't had him on, you need to. And he did an analysis of Twitter based in Australia. And I don't know the exact numbers, but upwards of 90% of the people could not recognize misinformation. And a little bit over 90% changed their vote because of the misinformation. And only 3% of the people could tell.
Social pressure, selective censorship, that whole 2016 model, kind of.
Yeah, and so that's how powerful it is. So when we start getting involved, free speech is not something that is just out there. I mean, free speech is fundamental to civilization. Mm-hmm. And people can't underestimate that. And when you start realizing that a few people can control the thoughts and the minds of the masses, and they're the ones voting, that's serious. And I think that's low tech, being honest. I mean, there's some pretty high tech stuff that they have, but that is super powerful, and it's not that high tech.
Well, people need to understand one of the reasons that carpetbaggers were kind of shunned and slammed and shamed years after the Civil War, not right after the Civil War, during the Reconstruction era, is because you had these guys in slick suits, with the advent of the label printer, in which you could apply sticky glue onto the back of paper so they could go down to the South, and when they would peddle their snake oils and things, it was on a fancy printed label in a bottle, and it looked legit. You'd never even seen a printer, much less something that could put glue on the back, something like that. And it created a system of appearing to be legitimate that created an excess of consumption during the Reconstruction period. That's where I feel like we are now. Anyone can put together, I mean, that's really where we were 15 years ago, but
that's right.
since we're playing catch up, you said it was very low tech. Anyone can put together a flashy intro, get a decent microphone now, have oodles of memory and connectivity, and say and make anything seem however they want to play a part of a narrative. And that's someone who's trying. It's a very Wild West situation.
It is. And that's why we need people to step up, and we need maturity, and we need to be serious about this. And we need to break out of our paradigms, because the paradigm is what's, not going to set us free. We have to break out of that and say, okay, how do we forge this forward where these tools are absolutely beyond powerful that we've ever had? And how do we maintain our freedom in this environment? But still, there's so many good things we can do. And so you can't just be like, it's all bad or it's all good. Just be very specific. This part's good. This part, not so much. Then another, like CBDC, everybody's, was talking about CBDC being bad. And yeah, but you can defeat CBDC. They just changed the name. So it's really important that you understand it and understand the functions that are going to happen, not necessarily get caught up in the names. You got to understand the functionality of what's happening.
This is what we used to describe in education when critical race theory became something entirely different. And I'd studied critical race theory for 8 years at the graduate level before it became a national issue. And it is a deeply disturbing and discriminatory process. But when the names change because people trust in kind of the status quo antebellum of, as long as the person at the top of the technocracy tells me that this is fine in the paradigm or in the system of what it is that we're already currently doing, as long as they don't use the word that is the red flag word, I'll continue to trust it. And that's right. Kind of a blind trust, and I know we're over time, I just can't help it. Kind of the frame pin that has come loose in society is the ability to be circumspect about systems that you are counting on that are decades old systems. You just think, well, I really want them to be secure, so I'm just going to whistle past the graveyard. Does that make sense, or did I wander through? And so you ignore,
you ignore some of the real red flags but that gets back to the understanding things. And someday we should do another show on the digital ID and why they want it. It's a natural progression, but why it actually is dangerous for freedom too. All these things are scary because they're so effective to cleaning up the data, but yet, do we really want to track everybody that easily? These are the things we have to have serious conversations about, but the people in Congress need to understand it.
I think that's really right on point. Sarah Westall, I'm so sorry that I'm not able to keep you on a little bit longer. We'll talk about dismantling the FCC perhaps another time.
Yes, I'd love that.
Thank you very much for joining us this evening. It's been a blast to be on the air with you. If you have a moment before we finish the episode, head down to the description, click a link over to the podcast side of things, subscribe, and leave us a review if you like the show. That seems to really, really upset the journos over at Slate and the Daily Beast. We'll be back tomorrow for more of the same style of shenanigans. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated and first on 93 WIBC. Take care.